Hi everybody, I'm Billy, and this is Antioch, Chapter 22, Angelus Bells. A gray sky spanned cold over the cobblestones and made them slick with drizzle. There were no more windows in Antioch. All had been boarded over. Ditch and Captain walked together, the only two people on the street. Each had a rifle on his shoulder. It was noon on a Tuesday. Ditch shrugged. They called me the assassin. Captain wore his long auburn waves tied back in a loose tail, and had a handsome cut of brown and white under his coat. Why? Who did that? Nobody. That's what I'm saying, man. We picked our own nicknames. It was stupid. I picked Assassin, just like everybody else, because it's like sinister or whatever. But when there's a dozen assassins running around, it kind of loses its punch, you know? When I got in the cage, the announcer would be all, "In this corner, Ditch, the assassin." And that's cool, but not if he's like, "And in the other corner, whoever, the assassin." Aye. Indeed. Some of them saw we're all calling ourselves that, so they'd stick something in the front to change it up. There was a murder-face assassin, and a pee-wee assassin, and the honkin' doggone tonk assassin. That guy was duped. Captain repeated the last one, tasting the words. Honkin' doggone tonk. I don't know. Maybe that one's legit. Still, that's a lot of assassins. Guys shouldn't be picking their own nicknames. Captain smiled. Did you ever find yourself staring across the cage into the eyes of another cold-blooded assassin? Yeah, one time. Did you win? Nah, man, I got DQ'd for low blows. That guy was a crybaby. He's a wah, ref, wah, ref. Suck it up, you know? Be a man. Don't cry to the referee, crybaby. Captain laughed. The crybaby assassin. Did Drake have a nickname? No. It was a lie. In the old world, if a professional fighter could take a lot of punishment while still coming forward, they were called a zombie, as a compliment to their toughness. The term had come from a time when the idea of such a creature was a fantasy, and even a joke. Drake earned that nickname in his first amateur fight, because of the beating he took without giving up. Dang, man, you're a zombie. Ditch respected it, but hated the thought of it in conversation. He was just training, you know, getting started. Captain nodded. Too bad. Too bad, and too bad for everyone, across the board. It's weird. I didn't know I'd miss him. There's a brotherhood that comes from being at sea, all packed in together like that. You get to know the breadth of good and bad in a man instead of what he wants you to know. Sailors are like a family that way. Ditch nodded. That's the truth. I was locked in that bathroom with him for all that time, too. Oh, here it comes. Captain knew Ditch liked to brag about how long he'd been in the bathroom. 23 days, was it, Ditch? I'd forgotten about that. You were in there for what? 3 days? 23 days, man! Captain drew back. 23 days! That's a hell! Yeah, I kept marking the stall with a pocket knife, you know, keeping score. We knew we were dead. Just wanted to see how long we could go. One last fight. Every day we'd check on each other, see if we're still kicking. Captain tapped himself on the nose. Terrible. Still, people have been known to go a lot longer than 23 days without food. Ditch frowned at him. Man, what would you know about it? I bet you never been one day without something to eat. Captain tried to remember if he had. You might be right about that. Still, people have been known to fast for 40 and 50 days at a time, if they've access to water. 23 isn't so much compared to that. And you were in a bathroom. Man, whatever, man. You know, you're a real know-it-all, you know? Captain laughed at him. I'd say I'm more of a know-a-lot. Then he patted his stomach and smacked his lips. You're making me hungry. Where is this place? You're sick. It's right over here. Captain bowed with a flourish. My thanks for the escort. Yeah, whatever, man. Where you been? Establishing my financial future. I'm now partners with the Chandler. We're making a killing on matchsticks. That's gross. Go pull some shifts on the wall. Biggs is on it double time. How much does it pay? It pays respect. That's what it pays. Captain jingled his hand in his pocket. I've already made a purse full of this town's respect. Are you sure I can't buy you lunch? Ditch was refusing. He still didn't want anything to do with Fergus, when the cauldron's doorbell rang. Marabas came out under the sign about 20 yards down. Captain's mouth fell open at the sight of him, the gunder's legs and step. Ditch waved. Marabas waved back, and then bounded away, toward the center of town. Captain said, That's... Ditch helped him out. Marabas, he's one of them hairy dummies, gunders, you know. Fascinating. You gotta get out more. Look, the wall's over that way for now. Ditch pointed northwest. Think about it, man. See you around. Ditch tapped him with a backhand to the chest, and then jogged toward the construction site, leaving Captain alone in the dreary lane. From the center of town the new church bell tolled. Ka-kang-kang, ka-kang-kang. It was Michael, bringing in the dead. The bell sounded in the morning, at midday, and in the evening, but not to mark the hour. It was intended to attract any Bowron wandering in or around the city. Captain shook out a chill and crossed to the restaurant's door. It was already locked. Ka-kang-kang. He knocked and watched up and down the way, tapping himself on the nose. Ka-kang-kang. The latches, click, gave him a rush of relief. Margot opened up, smiling. "Oh, the black man! You must be Captain! Come in, come in!" Captain said, "Aye, indeed. My thanks, madam." The door locked behind him. He turned and smiled at her. "And you're Margot?" "I am. It's a pleasure to have you. We've heard so much about you from Angelus and Biggs since they moved in. I've been looking forward to a visit. They've made you out to be a right pirate." "Arr." Margot waited 3 seconds, and then asked, "Arr what?" Captain left his little foreign joke at that. "Any pleasure in our meeting, dear lady, is entirely mine." He bowed, and then looked around the low, dark common room. The smell of sour milk lurked in its nooks and crannies. "Reminds me of home." "What a nice thing to say!" His eyes adjusted to the firelight, and he found the bowls of apples on the table. "Ah, malice! May I?" "Help yourself." "Here's a nice round fruit." He sank his teeth into it and broke a chunk away with a snap. Tart, sweet juice and saliva flooded his mouth. Wonderful genus. He sighed and grounded himself with its flavor and texture. "I've just beheld my first gunder. It's comforting to know that wherever you go, some things stay mercifully the same, no matter a cataclysm around them." "Ooh, such a pretty way to talk. You've some extra luck then, too. We've got fried chickens." Captain looked over the apple at her and chewed, contemplating what she'd said. There had been a stereotype in the old world that black men were abnormally fond of fried chicken. It was a strange leftover from the race wars before the unification of the great nations, long before the fall. Though a fairly harmless notion, considering some of the others. Still. No, there are no black men left in the world, other than the few of us sailors. She must have meant something else. Margot said, "Biggs has gone on and on about how much you black men love fried chickens. It's his recipe Fergus is playing with. It might just be fate that's brought you by, seeing as we have them." She nodded and winked. Captain cleared his throat. "Madam, everyone loves fried chicken." "Oh, I know, it's grand. Shall I get you a plate?" Amused by her innocence, he took a seat. "Please, that would be lovely. I'm just glad it's not ham. I hate ham." "I'm fond of a pork chop myself." Fergus called out from the kitchen. "Pepper, have we got a guest?" Margot put her fists on her hips and shouted down the hall. "Fergus, it's Biggs' friend, Captain!" Fergus shouted back, "The black man! Tell him we've got fried chickens!" She said, "I have!" and Fergus hoo-hooed as he got busy on the meal. Captain tapped himself on the nose until she faced him again. "Margot, it's neither fate nor fried chicken that's brought me here today." "No? What was it?" "My old friend, Biggs. He told me this is the only place in town worthy of celebrating an occasion with a cider." "He's right. What are you celebrating?" "My birthday." "A happy birthday to you, Captain." "Thank you." "You'll get one in the house for every 20 years. Now, I know you sailors can hide it. How many do you have?" 602. "Woo!" Margot laughed and clapped. "That's rich. You like a drink, do you? Business is dead, so I think we'll have one with you. Be right back." She and Fergus returned with a banquet for 3. Captain said the cider was the finest he'd had in years, and that was coming from a connoisseur. The bread's crust made a pleasant crackle as Fergus cut, but he didn't squash the loaf, and soon had soft pats of butter sinking into its steaming slices. They shared bowls of the cauldron's signature stew, like hot comfort from the cold, deep with nutrition and the flavor of the second day. And then, the chicken. A New World interpretation of an Old World favorite, served cool picnic style, and tender with a spicy, crunchy fry. Fergus and Margot enjoyed Captain's renewed enthusiasm after he tried each of those things set out before him. They talked for hours. When the conversation turned away from food, Margot said, "All by yourself on your birthday. That's sad. Why didn't you bring some friends?" "I'm not so by myself, am I? I'm with a fine couple." He raised his drink. "To new friends." The 3 clanked flagons, said "Cheers!" and drank to one another's company. Then Captain declared, "I'm stuffed to the gills." He leaned back, pulled out his pipe, a bag of leaves, and a box of lucifers. Margot said, "What's this?" He struck a match as an answer. She cried, "Mercy!" at the burst of flame. Fergus smacked the table. "That's that fire in a stick I was telling you about." It was Captain's turn to enjoy reactions. He lit the pipe, waved out the match, and puffed. Then he pushed the rest of the box over to them. "Please, accept these as a gift from one business to another. Just be careful not to burn your business down." Fergus was pleased. "We'll make it a trade for the meal." Captain smiled. "Fair deal." He liked Antioch. He could get anything he wanted for a box of matches. Handing them out and bartering with them were also good ways to introduce them around town and boost sales at the candle shop. Margot was delighted, until she smelled the pipe. "Ooh, they're brilliant! How kind of you! Oh, ooh, that's got a bit of a funk to it, doesn't it?" She'd grown accustomed to the sour milk. Now this. The sailors were a stinky crew. Captain closed his eyes and breathed. That part of a thing that makes it unseemly against a more common notion of beauty. Its funk, as you say, is often in what we'll find perfection to be true. Margot said, "It's that grand, is it?" "Oh, aye." Fergus said, "It smells like a devil." Captain said, "This'll make more money than lucifers, I'll wager." Then he offered the pipe with a devilish smile. "Would either of you care for a try?" Fergus was cautious, but Margot was game. She said, "All right, I'll give it a go." Fergus said, "Careful now." But once she had a hold of it, Margot put the bit in her mouth without qualm and sucked. Captain hadn't been fast enough to give her any instructions. Her eyes clenched and a violent cough blasted out of her. She grimaced with her tongue out and held the evil thing away at arm's length, waving her other hand in front of her face. "Oh, take it away, take it away!" Fergus grabbed it and said, "Pepper, are you okay?" Captain snickered. "I'd no chance to explain. A chance to explain." Fergus gave him the chance to explain, along with an iron glare. Captain said, "The first puff's a little rough." Then he snickered at his own explanation. Margot fanned herself, eyes watering, sure it was one of those coughs that would last forever. Captain's chemistry was a boon for Bing's candle shop at a time when only the strongest desire could get people to leave their homes. Those profits were nothing next to the rise in value of milk. Davies was squeezing gold out of the teats those days, and he rode the white horse, Aries. Each was a powerful picture of his kind, though the milkman's nose bent a little to the side. Hooves pounded moist turf as they rounded Antioch's western reach, heading north past the thorny expanse John and Daniel had traveled. Pop-a-thwomp, 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 pop-a-thwomp. Coming around to the northwest, they approached the 100 yards of wall so far completed, a stone and mortar section 8 feet thick and 18 feet high. Biggs sat atop a scaffold with his Springsteen boss, keeping watch for the hard-working masons below. Andelin sat with him, having brought lunch. They all waved when the horse and rider passed, just like they did every day. Davies and Aries took a turn into the city at the north, rather than dodging through the apple orchard, and the hooves hit cobblestone. Click-a-clack, 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 click-a-clack. The clatter was so piercing that the milkman was nearly deaf for those few seconds he reined Aries in to keep from trampling Ditch in an alley. He couldn't hear the bell ringing. Ka-kang-kang. Ditch flattened himself against the wall and shouted, "Hey, watch out! Every day with you! Where's your guard? You're supposed to have somebody with you, Bucknard!" Ka-kang-kang. Davies couldn't hear any of that either. He held up one hand and said, "Out of the way, Mitch! Official church business!" Then he charged through the space Ditch had given him. Ka-ka-clack, 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 ka-ka-clack. The little sailor shook his fist as they left him behind. They shot out of town and tore into the turf again to the northeast. Davies roared a challenge to the world. "Hey-ya, Aries!" And the horse built to a thrilling speed. On a good day, in season, they would have been galloping through a vast gold and green meadow that spread from there almost all the way to the road south. That day, the field was a sullen adversary, made of mire and dampening air, but still couldn't thwart their spirit. It wasn't until Davies saw a figure off in the foggy distance that he brought Aries to a halt. "Whoa, boy, whoa there." Aries didn't want to stop. He wanted to run. He stamped and pitched to make that known. Davies clucked at him and patted his neck, while staring at the misty shape. It was too big to be a man. They trotted toward it. Closing in, the figure revealed itself to be a horse. Davies recognized him. It was that red roan, Rascal. Davies laughed. "Thrown another thief, have you?" He rode up alongside and took the reins without trouble. "Let's get you home." Right away he noticed some hesitancy and a limp in Rascal's step. Davy stopped for a closer look and found a long, festering gash on one flank that continued partly through the saddle. He inhaled with a hiss. That's a nasty cut. Come on then, Michael will fix you up. He dismounted and walked the horses in. The mud plated his boots. They were slow to cross the wet field and through the lonely, narrow streets before coming to the graveyard. Michael was inside by then, and it was silent, but Davies was far too saucy to be afraid of Bowron. When he finally arrived at the church, he dropped both sets of reins and tiptoed toward Michael's bell, grinning. The bell hung 6 feet off the ground on sturdy posts with a rope to swing the clapper. Massive, gray, and the depth of a man's chest, it was unadorned but well made and had the voice of God if he were standing next to it. Michael planned on hanging it higher to save his ears. It was the largest of 5 bells. The smaller ones were stationed around the city for signaling Michael in case of trouble. They had been made by and represented the effort of the entire community. Sailors and citizens alike donated inspiration, time, and material to found them. The bells were the heart of a new Antioch. Davies crept up with an eye on Michael's door and gave the clapper one good pull. Quabong! The horses flinched. Moments later, Michael stomped out with an angry frown. How many times do I have to tell you people that's not what the bell's for? Ah, Davies, of course. Then he saw Rascal. What's this? Is Samuel here? Joseph? Davies said, No, just the horse. He's hurt. Come have a look. Michael removed his gauntlet and went around. The heat of an infection glowed from the wound. It was as long as Michael's arm and 2 inches deep. Running his fingers through the cleft in the hard leather saddle, Michael didn't need Jacob to tell him it could have been done by a Callaghan. Abraham had planned to go through Tabor on his way to Salem. Michael moved in front of Rascal and said, Hup, hup! He swatted the loose chain on his forearm as part of a command and threw his gauntlet on the ground. Lay down! Lay down! Rascal went to his knees and rolled onto his side. Michael was a little surprised. I've never seen him so obedient. He knelt, put his hand on the horse's head, and opened the way. Davies said, I wish John had been that careful with me. His boys had told him who'd broken his nose, but he preferred to say that John had dropped him. It's trouble this one's back, isn't it? Michael stayed on his knee, thinking. It's not a good sign, of course, but they're trained to come home on their own. Rascal wasn't trained to go home to Tabor, so I can't be sure what's happened. I'll admit it has me worried. That was a serious injury. Davies didn't have anything useful to say, so he said, I'm worried too. Sam's my favorite out of the lot of you. Michael smiled and stood up. Thank you for bringing Rascal to me. You want to take him? Finish that trade for the cow. Davies, believing the church needed at least 1 horse in its stable, had given Aries back to Michael the day John and Daniel left. No, that deal's done. He collected an empty milk can from the church doorstep, and then went over to pat the white stallion. He was quite fond of Aries. Thank you, then, for everything. With 2 horses in the stable now, I'll need more help for sure. Find a boy for me, won't you? I'm sure this has been hard on you. Davies took on a skeptical air. I don't know. He'd have to be a brave one to come out here so often. Not to mention, a mighty rider to work this great brute. Someone like that could take a long while to find. I doubt there's such a hardy soul in the whole city. Michael chuckled at Davies' bragging, which ended with, Ha ha, yes. Fergus was right. Nothing can cork your sauce. If you won't get me a stable boy, at least stop ringing my bell. The milkman grinned, ran over, and struck the bell with his can. Quang! It woke Rascal and startled Aries. See you tomorrow, brother! He waved goodbye as he walked home. Michael laughed, shook his head, and waved back. Then he watched Rascal get up. The wound's crust and pus sloughed away, disconnected from a canyonous scar. Michael's worry returned to the surface. He hoped Samuel and Joseph were safe. That is the end of Chapter 22. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can follow the link at the top of my website, www.williameharlan.com, and purchase the full novel from Amazon in ebook format for $2.99 or as a paperback for $12.99. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for Chapter 23, Death and Taxes.